Zilog and Moto has a worldwide audience thanks to the power of YouTube, and that's something that I'm pretty proud of. In fact, I'd have to go look at the stats, but I'm pretty sure that I get more visitors from outside the United States than locally, which actually makes sense due to the fact that Sega as a company tended to do better in Europe or Japan than here, except for, maybe a few years in the early 90s when Sonic the Hedgehog mania was running wild. Due to that, there's times, when I make references to things that, might not make sense to people that, don't live on this continent. You try to avoid it as a creator in an effort to, make things accessible and relatable to everybody, but, there's going to be times when, things don't translate. Like, say, for instance, when you're trying to get across that Chicago-style hot dogs are the pinnacle of how hot dogs should be served, or that driving on the right side of the road is the only acceptable way to operate a motor vehicle. Really, Forza Horizon, 2 games in a row where I have to drive on the left with a roster of mainly right-side drive vehicles? Yeah, but I digress. The point of this is that when I say a certain phrase, some of the audience isn't going to know what I'm talking about because, they're not from here. For instance, the title of this week's game, Montezuma's Revenge, which is actually going to be doubly confusing for certain people because they haven't heard of Montezuma's Revenge, due to it being one of the few Master System games released exclusively in the United States back in June of 1989. Now, if you're not from the United States or you've never been to Mexico, there's a good chance that you might not be familiar with this phrase. But I'm pretty sure the original developer of the game, Robert Yeager, was well aware of the double entendre. You see, growing up in the 1980s, and I'm sure probably long before then, there was always a running joke about, don't drink the water in Mexico due to Montezuma's Revenge. Was Montezuma's Revenge some sort of curse from 16th century Aztec ruler Montezuma II due to the Aztecs being ravaged by smallpox from the Spanish conquistadors? It's a nice story, but what it really is a colloquial name for diarrhea. However, I should probably pause for a second because, I'm sure that there's some of you out there that don't know me and are now confused because you don't understand why Parker Brothers signed off on a game named after a bodily function. Well, hi, my name is Dave, and welcome to Zilog and Moto, the channel where, regardless of the name, I assure you the actual content of Montezuma's Revenge could have been a lot worse. Anyway, I'm out to collect and review the nearly 1,280 titles released in the English language for the Sega Master System, Genesis/Mega Drive, Sega or Mega CD as the case may be, and finally the 32X. Basically, if I can plug it into a Genesis either by itself or with some sort of add-on, and be able to read what's up on the screen, I'm trying to get a copy of it and review it for posterity, with both looks at that original packaging and gameplay captured from original hardware whenever possible. Now that all that scatological humor is out of the way, Montezuma's Revenge, the game, actually has some history behind it, in that it didn't begin life on the Master System. Instead, the title was originally developed for Atari's 8-bit home computer line in 1984, and then was ported to other home computers and consoles that same year. You probably would not be surprised to find out that, I've got some concerns with how a 5-year-old game originally designed for much less powerful hardware is going to work on the Master System. Was Parker Brothers able to update and make Montezuma's Revenge palatable for audiences on the brink of a new decade? Or is Montezuma's Revenge about as palatable as, that other Montezuma's Revenge? Well, we'll dive into all that, but first, a look at this very North American package. And here's my copy of Montezuma's Revenge for the Master System. Or should I say Montezuma's Revenge, with a random nonsense accent mark over the G, featuring Panama Joe trademark, as it says in the title logo here. We'll come back to that, but as far as this copy goes, it's in fantastic shape, inside and out, with really the only blemish on the outer cover being that the hang tab was removed at some point, albeit cleanly. Other than that, the outer cover is completely free of any kind of marks, and the inner cover is likewise fully intact, with no edge wear, sun bleaching, or water damage. With this being a North American exclusive, it can be on the pricey side, since there's no possible cheaper European version to grab, and it currently goes for just over $100 for a complete copy, which is, about what I paid for it when I picked it up on my last convention trip a few months ago. Okay, now let's talk about that cover. Parker Brothers specifically released 3 games for the Master System, Montezuma's Revenge, Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego, and King's Quest. If you notice, all three have some similarities when it comes to the covers, in that they all have the traditional white background, but the art for each game is inset in a circle or close to it. Then at the bottom, all three games are referred to as text adventure action games, because clearly Parker Brothers didn't know how to pick a genre for their games, so they just went with all of them. And I don't know, while I could see the argument for it on Carmen Sandiego and King's Quest, I'm not so sure it's accurate here. Then there's the title and art. In this case, both of those go all the way back to 1984, as they're recomposited versions of the art and logo used on the original release. Strangely, depending on which version of the game you're talking about, there was a full page of art, but they decided to crop it down for most releases. Also, if you look really close, note how some of the fire has been removed from the Master System cover. Not sure what prompted that decision. Regardless, if you have a version that has the proper artwork, and not the Spectrum version that couldn't even get the name of the game right, I think the art is solid. The title, on the other hand, why put an accent mark over the G? Is it supposed to be pronounced Montezuma's Revenge? And then there's the Panama Joe thing, complete with trademark. In reading up on this, I guess Parker Brothers thought that they could maybe turn the main character of the game into a mascot that was featured in multiple games, which is why his name was emphasized. And then I guess the trademark notation is due to the fact that Panama Joe could easily be confused with Panama Jack, the similar mascot of the clothing and beachwear line. You would have thought that by 1989, Parker Brothers would have known that that ship had sailed, but points for trying, I guess. Flipping over the back, and we've got three pretty rough and dark-looking screenshots from the game that don't exactly help the case that this is a relic from the mid-'80s, and then a significant amount of flavor text over to the side. They probably could have thinned this all out a bit, but it doesn't do a bad job of hyping up the game. However, that last stinger, but keep your eyes and ears open, or you could be the next victim of Montezuma's Revenge. Ew. Opening up the package, and as mentioned, the manual and cartridge are in fantastic shape, and the manual appears barely red. Unlike other Master System manuals, this is all black and white, with a little bit of red. The manual is solid and probably over-explains the game, if anything, but I do have to point out this section from the intro. Meet Panama Joe. That's what they call him around these parts, though no one knows his real name or where he comes from. Well, his name is Joe, and he's from Panama. We didn't exactly need the Scooby Gang to solve this mystery. Anyway, that's the package. Let's boot this one up and see what Parker Brothers has in store for us this time. When I was growing up, I remember playing two games in particular on the Commodore 64 that I really liked, Jumpman and Hero. Neither is particularly complicated, even by later 8-bit console standards, but they were both fun. Jumpman was originally released by Epyx in early 1983, and while the Commodore 64 version is probably more well known, it was actually originally designed for Atari's 8-bit home computers, and then the Commodore version was worked on afterwards. Jumpman is a single-screen action title where you have to run and jump around a building, displayed as a framework a la Donkey Kong, to collect bombs to prevent the building from exploding, in a series of themed levels that progressively get more difficult and add enemies to prevent you from saving the building. It's a simple game, but that actually works in its favor, because as you progress, surviving comes down to skill and a bit of strategy, due to later levels having part of the structure disappear when you grab a bomb, making them either very difficult or impossible to complete if you do them in the wrong order. The key with Jumpman is that it's called Jumpman and not Fall Guy, and if Jumpman walks off a platform, he's not going to float to one below, he's going to fall down and die, in dramatic fashion. Hero's a bit different. Hero, or Helicopter Emergency Rescue Operation, is an action title from Activision, which was first released for the Atari 2600 in March 1984, with the Commodore version that I was familiar with following up later on that year. Hero involves you as the player having to fly down into a cave system via a series of screens, while having to avoid various enemies and environmental hazards on those screens, to eventually rescue someone stranded in the cave, which then starts the next mission in a different cave. Hero is slightly more complex than Jumpman, in that not only do you have a head-mounted laser you can fire, you also carry sticks of dynamite that can be used to blow up walls. and if you're not careful, you can accidentally knock out lights that provide your only way of seeing in the caves, making navigating those particular rooms treacherous at best. Unlike Jumpman, there's not a set series of levels to complete. Instead, there's 17 preset levels, and then after that the levels are randomized, leading to the game to just be a high score chase. To all those out there that are now complaining because I'm not actually talking about Montezuma's Revenge yet, trust me, I'm getting there. Montezuma's Revenge in its original form would be considered a contemporary of these two titles. It started out life as a homebrew title of developer Robert Yeager, who apparently went with his dad to the summer 1983 Consumer Electronics Show in Chicago to show it off, at which point Parker Brothers saw it and bought the rights to the game from him, and then rewrote it for eventual release a year later in September of 1984. Montezuma's Revenge shares some elements of both Jumpman and Hero, notably the falling deaths of Jumpman and the proceeding down into the depths of Hero, along with the potentially dark levels that are difficult to navigate. Montezuma's Revenge ultimately is a bit different though. While it doesn't have a set of individual levels like Jumpman, or an unlimited set of levels like Hero, it does have a static set of pyramids to navigate through, with the original release featuring 9, and the pyramid layouts and enemies getting more difficult to get past the higher the number of pyramid you happen to be playing on. It's an interesting concept for a game, and especially with Indiana Jones being all the rage at the time due to the recently released Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, if I had played Montezuma's Revenge in the mid-80s, at the same time that I was playing Jumpman and Hero, I probably would have liked it. There's just one problem here. As mentioned, the Master System version of Montezuma's Revenge was released in June of 1989, almost 5 years later than those other versions. In that time, Sega would release the Mark III, re-release it as the Master System, and then release the Mega Drive. 3 Super Mario Bros. Games have been released, 4 if you include the original Super Mario Bros. 2. The Temple of Doom was no longer the most recent Indiana Jones movie, instead replaced by The Last Crusade. The Los Angeles Lakers had won 3 NBA championships. David Lee Roth and Sammy Hagar had released a total of 6 albums and an EP. Arnold Schwarzenegger and Sylvester Stallone had starred in 13 movies. Stephen King had released 7 novels, including The Dark Tower 2. The point is, as that faithful narrator in The Dark Tower would say, the world had moved on. But for some reason, the powers that be at Parker Brothers said, screw it, we can squeeze some more blood out of that stone. And you wonder why the Master System didn't sell well in the United States. Anyway, the Master System version of Montezuma's Revenge is almost what you would expect if you were familiar with the older versions of the game, although I guess there's 2 key differences. The first is, the game now consists of 11 levels or pyramids, and when starting the game, you can choose to start on any level 1 through 6. But if you want to play on any level beyond 6, you'll have to get there on your own. This was a curious decision for reasons I'll get to in a minute, but I'm not going to specifically complain about a game having extra content, especially in the 8-bit era. The other difference is, now each of the pyramids has a page of text that's displayed before the start of the level, detailing a story about the Aztec god that particular pyramid is dedicated to. Like the additional levels, I'm not going to complain about something extra being added to try to dress up a 5-year-old game, but ultimately, the text is somewhat nonsensical, and something that absolutely no one that plays the game is going to care about, with it most likely just being skipped past very quickly to get to the action. However, I think this addition is how Parker Brothers justified the cover description of the game being a text adventure action game, because without it, there would have been no text whatsoever. What you're left with is really no different than the original game, with the exception of some marginally improved graphics. But even with that, the game still fits in a single megabit cartridge, so anyone that had played the game before would know what to expect. However, for anyone that hasn't played it before, like me before this week, I should probably describe what you actually do. The game opens with Panama Joe running up the steps outside of a pyramid and entering the room at the top floor. From here, you can choose pyramids 1 through 6, which go up in difficulty the further you go. And then it's time to climb down into the first real level of the pyramid after a brief description of said pyramid is displayed. Like a normal pyramid, each level of the pyramid is larger than the further you go down, with the first level having 3 rooms, the second level having 5,
etc., until you get all the way down to the 9th level with 19 rooms, meaning that the entire pyramid has 100 individual rooms if you include the intro room. Of course, with all those rooms, the pyramid is constructed in a bit of a maze fashion, so it's not as simple as merely dropping down 9 levels to the treasure room located in the center of the lowest level. As you navigate your way around the rooms, you find out quickly that Panama Joe was clearly not previously a Boy Scout, because boy did he go into the pyramid unprepared, walking in without any way to defend himself or any utilities like ropes or, more importantly, sources of light. At first, the only thing Panama Joe is capable of is jumping or climbing ladders or ropes. Well, I guess technically he's also capable of falling to his death, which he will do over and over and over, as any drop taller than himself will result in death. Panama Joe instead is a bit more similar, and I hate to make this connection, with MacGyver, who famously liked to travel light and pick things up as he went, which Panama Joe does as he has to collect several types of items in the pyramid to make his way through. The most common pickup will be red, white, and blue keys, which go with color-coordinated doors. But Joe can also grab a one-use sword, a magic amulet which temporarily deactivates enemies, but not make you invincible, and possibly, most importantly, a torch that will allow you to see in the lowest levels of the pyramid that normally would be dark without it. For a platformer developed by a 16-year-old in 1983, from a base perspective, these are not necessarily bad concepts for a game. And again, if you're reviewing the game as originally released in 1984, I can definitely see what they were going for, and understand some of the limitations that they were dealing with from a hardware and programming perspective. Again, there's just one problem. At best, you are playing this version of the game in June of 1989, not September of 1984. That's almost 5 years for Parker Brothers to have upgraded things, to have extended gameplay, to have fixed problems or limitations with the game. But honestly, as part of my trip down memory lane on the Commodore 64 this week, I played that original version of Montezuma's Revenge, and it's a better game than the Master System version, even with its less detailed graphics. Well, I guess I should be fair about one thing. In the original version of the game, when you grabbed the amulet, it would take effect immediately, which allowed you to play the game with only one button. Whereas in the Master System version, you can carry it around and use it strategically when you want to instead. So I guess technically they made an improvement in that one area. However, this actually shines a light on another glaring problem with the original game's design. To get to the end of the game, which I refuse to believe that anyone ever actually did without cheating, you're going to need as many lives as possible. To get extra lives, you need points, which primarily are gotten by collecting artifacts as you go through the rooms. All pretty standard stuff, right? Well, remember how I said if you get an amulet, you can carry it around. When you pick it up, it goes into your inventory with the keys, swords, torches, whatever. But you can only hold 5 items in your inventory. Okay, fine, that makes sense. The game is keeping you from just stocking up on things. But for some reason that I'm sure made sense in 1983 when the game was originally designed, you can't pick up artifacts when your inventory is full. The artifacts don't actually take up spots in your inventory, so as long as you have one open spot, you can pick up whatever. But if your inventory is full, Panama Joe will just act like they're not even there. Again, I get it. Or, maybe originally there was some sort of programming limitation here. Maybe Robert just wanted to throw players a curveball with a design. Whatever the case may be, the fact that this wasn't fixed in the Master System version, but they somehow had time to add text intros and 2 more pyramids, is insane. This is probably the most anachronistic feature or bug that I've seen in the game in the history of Zilog and Moto so far, and it's indefensible for Parker Brothers to have not fixed that in 5 years. Another thing that I have issue with in the Master System release is where it just screams programming negligence, is the utter lack of audio in the game. The other versions of the game feature just a few sound effects as Panama Joe runs around, and then a few notes of La Cucaracha when you grab an item. The Master System version? It features just a few sound effects as Panama Joe runs around, and a few notes of La Cucaracha when you grab an item. Okay, technically there's a short bit of intro music that now plays as Panama Joe runs up the steps of the pyramid at the beginning, but that is the only bit of audio that's added to this version of the game. In 5 years. I think we've veered from merely lazy to just a complete dereliction of duty on Parker Brothers' part. I'm not even going to talk about the graphics. You see them. Are they improved? Yeah, technically. Does the game look good? No. It's a simple game from a simpler time, I get it, but this is not the game that you're going to be trying to show off to your friend that owns a NES to prove that the Master System has better graphics. The final thing I'm going to mention is when I said earlier that I thought the original version of the game was better than the Master System version. So I should probably say why that is. And the answer is pretty simple. The controls. Yes, the graphics are improved, as negligible as it is. The audio, what little there is arguably of better fidelity. There's more levels, and you can choose more of them to start out on. But the controls are sloppy. For whatever reason, there's a significant delay in jumping, meaning that you have to make sure that you're trying to jump slightly before you normally would. Keep in mind, jumping is literally all Panama Joe can do. And they screwed it up. How? How do you mess this up? How do you let this get through playtesting? The Commodore 64 version plays perfectly. Is it still hard? Sure, but at least it seems fair. If you learn nothing else from this review, know this. There is nothing worse than an already hard game with bad controls on top. I'm not going to lie, I didn't have high hopes for Montezuma's Revenge, given what it is. But I was hoping for more than this. And then to have the gut punch of the game not even having proper controls, along with not having any significant improvements made to the game. I mean, if the game was going to get turned into effectively just an arcade action game where a high score is the only real goal, since actually finishing the game is out of the question, couldn't they at least have added a high score table and putting in your initials? I mean, how much work would that have been? Normally, I would give this game 1 star, since it's actually functional, just really poor. But with the control issues, no, this is 0 stars. This is a total bomb. Don't play this, don't buy this, and if you must play it, play the original version.
And that's it for Montezuma's Revenge. I don't think I've really got anything else to say about this one. Well, okay, it may be one thing. You might remember me reviewing fellow North American Master System exclusive ALF back in episode 191. If you don't, I'll summarize. It also got 0 stars. However, as truly awful as ALF was, I would play it again over this version of Montezuma's Revenge. That's how strongly I would recommend you avoid this. At least ALF was interesting, and you could finish it. Imagine that, a game that you can beat honestly. There's a full walkthrough for Montezuma's Revenge on GameFAQs, and all I can say is they must have used an amazing amount of save states to create that. But if you read it, it delivers one final ignominy. The game has no ending. If you actually manage to finish the 11th pyramid, you just get dumped back to the beginning of the 11th pyramid. Just the utter disrespect to players here is amazing. Next time on the channel, we take a second look at a game where I previously reviewed the Genesis version of the game, and viewer Paul Miller 996 complained, "Oh my god, enough about Populous." At first, this comment kind of took me by surprise because, while I remembered mentioning Populous in the review, I didn't remember talking about it that much. So I actually went back and looked at the script and, sure enough, there was a paragraph that was pretty Populous heavy. Lesson learned. So to you, Paul Miller 996, I promise there will be no mention of Populous in the next review. Hopefully you enjoy. Anyway, that's it for Zilog and Moto episode 298. If you liked what you saw here and want to see more, please think about liking and subscribing if you're so inclined, as it will help more people see these videos. But most importantly, whatever you like to play, have fun, and be excellent to each other. Later.